Okay, well, hello everybody watching us today. I'm Dave Began. I'm a park ranger here at Anacapa Island, or I should say today underneath Anacapa Island. This is part of Channel Islands National Park, and our program is called Channel Islands Live, and we are live and interactive. And today we're really happy to be joined by a large number of adult education centers. And so let's start with our good friends in Ventura, Hans, with the Ventura Avenue Senior Center. Can I hear a big shout out hello from everybody watching over there today? Hello. And we're also joined through the Senior Learning Network. Stand by, Josh. There's a giant sea bass that just came into view, so we're just going to interrupt. Oh my gosh. I don't know that we've ever seen that so well live. That's proof that we are live. We couldn't find that. That's probably a 500-pound black sea bass or giant sea bass. That was incredible. It just came out of nowhere. We have a team of support divers down here helping us out, and they pointed it out. I'm actually fairly blinded by the bright lights of the camera, so thank you, Diver Dan, for helping us there. Well,
Central Casting comes through again.
Yeah, we will. What a great way to start our program today. And we are also joined by a large number of adult education centers that are linked to us through the Senior Learning Network. So, Ellen, let me have a big shout out to all of your people all over the country that are joining us today.
Say hi, guys. Hello. Thank you.
And, Ellen, how many different locations are we broadcasting out to through your bridge?
Right now, I'm showing 11.
11 different places in 11 spots around the country. So, hello to all of you. We're also joined by thousands of people watching us live as we stream on Facebook over the internet. And I'd like to thank our tech partners, Ventura County Office of Education, and Explore.org for helping to make that possible today. And last but not least, those of you here on the surface of Anacapa Island that rode out on the boat with us today on the Vanguard, who are watching us from the dock on monitors, and we even have people swimming around in the water. So we're just immersed in the water and immersed in people who are interested in what's in the water here. And that's what we're going to be showing you today. We started with giant sea bass. I'm not sure how we topped that, but we are in a towering kelp forest. And have any of you ever been out here? Those of you in Ventura, Hans, let's ask your group to the Channel Islands on the boat. I couldn't quite hear you. You'll have to say it a little bit louder.
Yes, a couple of people raised their hand.
Couple have, okay. So you've seen the kelp forest out here most likely. And kelp is actually, this is literally a forest, an underwater forest. But it's actually not a plant. It's a giant algae. And it is the main structure of this forest. It provides food and shelter, not just for that giant sea bass, but also for about 1,000 different types of living organisms, from microscopic plankton all the way up to blue whales, the largest animals ever to have lived on the planet, can be found around the Channel Islands. And kelp itself, it's not really a plant, even though this is a forest, it's an algae. And let's move a little bit over here, Josh, because I want to show you a really good example of how kelp is perfectly adapted to this underwater environment. So on land, and I think we have people from all types of different ecosystems watching today and participating, but on land, in a forest, trees have a rigid trunk. But underwater, because the water's moving so much, kelp actually has these flexible, pliable features called stipes. And so it can flow back and forth with the motion of the ocean. And another adaptation kelp has to the underwater environment is that down here, as opposed to a land forest where the nutrients are mostly in the soil, here we're swimming in a soup of nutrients. It's all around us in the water, and kelp can absorb the nutrients right out of the water through its leaf-like blades, through the stipes themselves, and can take advantage of the richness of the liquid and
It's the crest
environment here.
because it was going fine just a second ago.
Does someone have a question? Okay, we'll continue on. So, the last adaptation I'll show you are these bulbous features. They're gas-filled bladders. And is there anyone out there who knows why kelp would have that feature as an adaptation? I think I heard someone say it helps it to float.
It's something in your computer
Yeah.
that won't project into here.
Yeah, it actually floats the kelp right up to the surface. And Josh, why don't we aim the camera up and you can get a good shot of the sunlight streaming through, even though we are in about 25 feet of water right now. Sunlight does reach through here, and through the process of photosynthesis, kelp converts that energy into glucose and also into oxygen. In fact, kelp and other marine algae produce over half of the oxygen in the air we breathe every day. So this is an important aspect of the kelp forest, of course, for all the animals that live here, but also important to you and I. And one thing that's really special about where we are today is that this particular area, it's part of Channel Islands National Park. It's also part of Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary. And on top of that, this specific area that we're diving in has been protected for over 30 years as a marine reserve. So no fishing is allowed here. Animals like the giant sea bass are protected as a species, and that type of ecosystem management has been happening for a long time. But it's not always as effective as we would like in maintaining species. Some species have declined in the oceans, as I'm sure you're aware. And so this is an attempt to have an ecosystem-based management system in order to have a more naturally functioning environment. And that's important because it helps this area to become more resilient to changes that could occur here, because there are still threats to the kelp forest. So Josh, why don't we drop down to the bottom, maybe right over here, and let's see if our support divers have had a chance to locate some of the creatures that rely on the kelp forest for survival. And I actually see that Dan, who pointed out that giant sea bass, has a couple of animals that he's going to bring over here. Thank you, Dan. So does anybody know what animals I'm holding in my hands? And Hans, let's go to Ventura. Anybody?
Sea urchin.
Sea urchins, that's right. And I have two different species. The one in my left hand is a purple sea urchin. Now they're both in my left hand. The one in my right hand is called a coronado urchin. So you can see that there is quite a bit of variety in urchins. One has long spines that are highly flexible. The other has short spines. And just a simple change in the balance of how many of each species live down here can have a dramatic effect on the kelp forest. There's a species similar to the coronado urchin, which is a very active animal right now, called a red urchin that is eaten as a sushi item in sushi restaurants. It's known as uni when it's on our plate. Hang on, we're getting a little bit of a swell knocking us around. And if too many of these are fished out in areas that are not marine reserves, or too many of the red urchins, these purple urchins fill the void, and they will eat all the kelp. So these are grazers. Purple urchins will actually eat the portion of the kelp that anchors it to the rocks. And so if we overfish, we can change the balance of life down here, and all of this kelp will disappear. And I'm going to tell you an example by calling Dan back in of changes that have occurred here recently. So I'm going to give Dan the urchins. Take the current out on. And those urchins will be put into a crevice so that they'll be protected against predators, because we don't want to give any of the predators that live down here a free lunch. They have to earn it on their own. But who knows what I'm holding in my hand now? We'll go to Senior Learning Network. Do any of your people know? What is this?
Looks like a sea
Anybody
star.
know?
It looks like a sea star. It's a piece of a sea star. And it's an example of a change that has occurred here. This year, we had a drastic water temperature change with the El Nino atmospheric event, and for some reason, a disease went through the sea star populations called wasting disease, and almost all of the sea stars that were numerous died off here. And this is just a little bit that's left of a sea star that recently succumbed to this. And fortunately, though, we are starting to see sea stars return, and that's a sign of the resilience of this particular kelp forest. So let's do another trade-off. And this is our, actually, I'm just going to put, okay, I'll give that back to, that's our support diver, John, who's been helping out as well. And I'll take both of those. So I have two different animals, a grazer in my left hand and a decomposer in my right hand. And we're getting maybe a little more challenging as we go, but does anybody know what this animal is? Just shout it out if you do.
At the sea slug?
Sea slug is a good answer, and in particular it's called a sea hare, and it's very buoyant. And sea hares graze on kelp. They're called sea hares because they have these appendages that look like rabbit ears. And this is a sea cucumber that is a decomposer. So think of this as like the earthworm of the sea. Now, does anybody want to eat one of these? Let me hear a big shout out if you think this would be a great meal. I don't hear anything. But people actually do eat these, and outside of the reserves, there are very few sea cucumbers left because they are harvested and eaten. And so they act again like earthworms. They help to keep the bottom sand loose, and there are other animals, small crustaceans and things that live in the sand.
For a second and leave the meeting and start.
So they're important for the environment. Now I'm going to go ahead and set down the sea cucumber because it will be just fine on the ground there. But the sea hare, I'll tell you one other interesting fact. This is not only a diverse environment, but it's very abundant. There are a lot of things living down here. Almost every surface area is covered with life. And it's said that sea hares, if they were to lay their eggs, which they do, they look like masses of spaghetti. And if every egg that a sea hare in the kelp forest laid hatched, and all of those eggs grew to maturity as sea hares and laid eggs and those hatched, it would only take about, this one's crawling around my glove, 6 months for the entire planet to be covered several feet deep in these animals, in sea hares. So it's just an idea of the abundance of the sea, and the bigger they get and the older they get, the more offspring they produce. Unlike us, where we have a curve in our production of children based on age. So I'm going to go ahead, let's lay this sea hare. Josh will put it right down on this piece of kelp and let it have a meal there. And notice how it camouflages in so well, the color of it and the markings on it. And that is a, of course, way that it helps protect itself So let's move a little bit more, Josh. Is that okay if we go right over here to this rocky area? Because we're getting a little bit of surge here, and it's sort of throwing us off a little bit. So we're just going to kind of make our way. This is a nice spot. I'm going to drop down back to the bottom. And let's take a look at one more animal that Dan has found. And, oops, thanks, Dan. I'll almost let this one go. Hang on a second, I'm caught up in the kelp myself. Bear with me for 1 second. There we go. Okay, so this is a California spiny lobster. And unlike those of you who are watching us across the country in the Atlantic regions, you may be familiar with New England lobsters that have claws. But here, California spiny lobsters have big tails and these antennae that they use as sensory organs. They're protected by the spines on their shell, so thus the California spiny lobster. This one is a male. I can tell by the markings on its tail, and it's a medium-sized lobster. But outside of the reserve, this would probably end up becoming dinner on somebody's dinner plate. And here in the reserve, this lobster can live to be large and become very old. And as I mentioned, just like that sea hare, it will produce more and more offspring, eggs that become larvae. And the lobsters in the reserves, when those eggs hatch, they'll float way offshore and then back ashore, all up and down the coast, even in areas that are not protected as marine reserves. So marine reserves are a source of a production of sea life for even areas that are outside of the reserves themselves. Now, I'm going to bring Dan back in, get him this lobster back, because, and I'm going to take one more thing from him. We want to put that lobster, just like those sea urchins, back in a nice safe spot. And I'll show you a shark. This is also a first for Channel Islands Live. But our divers, while they were looking for animals down here, found a toy shark. I swear we did not bring this as a prop. And it's one example of one of the threats to the kelp forest. We've always joked about bringing, Josh and I have always joked about bringing a toy shark down here, and one just appeared. So what's the threat that this toy underwater here, this plastic toy, represents to the kelp forest? I think you all know. Pollution. So even though we are offshore, we're actually up current of most of the pollution sources, and we're in a national park, national marine sanctuary, and marine reserve. We're not so far away that we're immune to threats like pollution, like plastics floating offshore. Now, this is sort of a funny one, and we'll probably keep this. We'll definitely take it out of the ocean. And so we're not going to give this back to our divers to save it. We're going to give it back to them to remove it from the area. But there's not a place in the world where there aren't plastics found floating in the oceans. And so there are still some threats to this marine environment. Does anybody else have an idea as to what another threat might be to this kelp forest? Hans, let's go to Ventura.
Boats. They're saying boats.
Boats? Yeah, boats indirectly. A boat could sink, and it would have fuel in it and other contaminants, and it does happen out here. We get rough weather sometimes. And there are also oil rigs offshore. There could be an oil spill. Those are all types of pollution. Boats could pose another threat, though, because people fishing off of boats, and outside of the reserve, it is allowed here in the park and sanctuary. They could poach inside a sanctuary, and it does happen sometimes. Or if too many fish, like those sea urchins I mentioned, they're not fish, but animals down here, get removed from the system, it changes the balance of life. And so overfishing or fishing in an unsustainable way is also a threat to this ecosystem. And one of the other ones we've touched on already, it's changing climate. And so just like that sea star we saw that was affected by the warming waters or the disease that may have been linked to that, we're not sure. Those sea stars, which were abundant, play a role in the balance of life here. Now, we're hoping and we're starting to see a recovery in that species, and that will help to restore the natural balance out here. But if the water is warm too much, the kelp that lives in a certain temperature range, let's say the high 40s into the 60s here, upper 60s at most, will die off. And we did see that this year. Now that the waters have cooled again, the kelp has grown back, showing that resilience. But of course, if the kelp disappears, all of these creatures we've seen that rely on it for survival will disappear as well. So today, starting with that giant sea bass, which was a really neat surprise, and if you want to see it again, this program is being archived on our park webpage through our Facebook page, and you can watch it again. I'm going to. The lobster, the sea urchins, all of these animals show you the diversity and the abundance of life that is down here in Channel Islands National Park. Half this park is made up of underwater ocean areas, and we've seen a little bit about how even in a protected area, these animals, this whole ecosystem does face some threats, but we've seen how marine reserves and ecosystem management, fishing in a sustainable way, being careful about not polluting, all of these things can help protect this kelp forest. And remember, early on, I mentioned that this is not just an important place for all the animals that live here, but the oxygen that is produced by the plants and algae in the ocean allow us to survive on this planet as well. So take a deep breath along with me. And as you exhale, I hope that all of you do what you can to help protect the oceans, support areas like marine reserves, and on this nearing 100th anniversary of the National Park Service, help us to protect all these wildlands, not just for us, but for future generations as well. So I'd like to thank everybody who joined us today, and I'll say goodbye from Underwater Anna Kaplan from Channel Islands Live. Bye, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.